Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Random Gamer Riven, the editor of Randomised Gaming, and I'm just giving you an introduction before we show this non-commentated playthrough of Bare Knuckle 3. And for those of you who don't know, Bare Knuckle 3 is of course the Japanese version of Streets of Rage 3. Now before I say anything more, I'd like to give a very warm welcome and thank you shout out to videogameimports.com. And they are a specialist video gaming website that handles imports and retro games. And they've been in business now for well over 20 years, I think. I know I've been using them for at least 15 years myself personally. And some of the import games you've actually seen on the channel, certainly some of the Japanese ones, we will have actually sourced from them. They are a UK-based website, but they do ship worldwide. And last year they managed to source a complete copy of Bare Knuckles 3 on the SEGA Mega Drive, so I jumped at the chance to pick it up. I personally have had a PAL copy of Streets of Rage 3 for years, however the Japanese version of Bare Knuckles 3 really is the definitive version. It is such a superior game that it really is like night and day when you compare the two, but I will go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. But if you are looking for a specialist video games website and retailer, I highly recommend Video Game Imports. They have sourced so many games for us over the years, especially Japanese ones that have often been very hard to find here in the UK, and they're very friendly to talk to. I will leave contact details in the video description below for the website. And in the past few years they've also now worked with a video game store known as Games Galaxy in, I think I'm going to pronounce this right as I'm not from this part of the UK, but Consit, and they are a specialist retailer who do a whole host of retro games, and they work in conjunction with Video Games Import, and again I'll leave their contact details below as well if you want to jump onto their Facebook page. But yes, if you're looking to source a hard to come by Japanese or North American game, I would certainly look at getting in contact with Video Game Imports. And I will also say I did purchase Bare Knuckles 3 with my own money, so I can plug them as much as I want. Now I was just going to do a straight playthrough video, but I have had a couple people ask me if I could just do a quick bullet point list of just some of the changes that have taken place between the Japanese release of Bare Knuckle 3 and the Western release of Streets of Rage 3. Now, while the original Mega Drive version of Bare Knuckle 3 was never released in Western markets, it was however included on later collections that did get Western releases. So at present you can find it on the Japanese Sonic Gems collection for GameCube and PlayStation 2 along with the other Streets of Rage games. It was included in the Western release of the Sega Vintage Collection Streets of Rage released on Xbox 360. It was also released on the SEGA Mega Drive / Genesis Classics, available on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch and PC. Although Streets of Rage 3 was also a game that really pushed the Mega Drive to its very limits, and as a result has been incredibly hard to correctly emulate for many years. Notably the sound has always been off even in some of the most recent retro collections that included it. Now for me, Bare Knuckle 3 really is the best game in the series. The new run and roll functionality really improves the pace of the game. It's so much faster than the previous two games, and the incredibly poorly designed Streets of Rage 4, which plays vastly inferior to the third game, as the characters all move in Streets of Rage 4 like they have lead boots. The branching path format seen at the end of the game was a real nice touch as well, and scrolling beat 'em ups like Guardian Heroes on the Sega Saturn and the two Dungeons & Dragons arcade games from Capcom show how in depth you can make a scrolling beat 'em up when you use branching paths to great effect. It really was how the genre needed to evolve. The unofficial Streets of Rage remake also used branching paths to great effect and was a really great title. In fact, that homebrew remake, although it's not official and Sega did get it removed, was a fantastic little follow-on, and I really wish Sega had got the developers of that to make Streets of Rage 4, as it's vastly better than the Streets of Rage 4 we got. Now here's where I say something that likely will confuse people. I think Bare Knuckle 3 is a vastly better game than Bare Knuckle 2. However, when it comes to Streets of Rage, I think Streets of Rage 2 is a better game than Streets of Rage 3. This is down to all the balance changes that have taken effect between the release of the Japanese version and the Western version. Now, I actually have my suspicion the Western release of Streets of Rage 3 may have been an earlier version, based on what I understand about development cycles and production runs and getting things to market. I also think there may have been some politics going on in Sega of America, as some of the stuff that was censored in Streets of Rage 3 was kind of present in Streets of Rage 1 and 2 and wasn't censored in those versions. But the most egregious changes are actually to the balancing and difficulty setting, as Streets of Rage 3 actually removes the easiest Japanese difficulty setting and bumps them all down one, so very hard became hard, normal became easy, hard became normal. On top of this, health items were also removed, and numerous enemies also had their health drastically increased as well. I believe there was also some balancing changes to the amount of damage you do and the amount of damage you take as well from enemies. Now, this subject has been covered on a number of websites over the years, but currently the one with the very best article on it and most in depth is the one on the cutting room floor, and I'll link to that in the description below. Although I am going to cover a few points the cutting room floor don't currently cover just yet. So just to give you a few examples of the changes here, on the left you can see a few of the character sprites. As you can see, the female enemy sprites were given more clothing. Obviously they didn't like the fact they were showing off a bit of flesh in the original version, despite the fact in Streets of Rage 2 Electra and even Streets of Rage 1 was showing a bit more flesh and was having sort of fetish gear on, but for some reason they censored it a bit in Streets of Rage 3. Didn't really make much sense. Again, you have the weird colour palette changes, quite why they felt Axel needed to have a bright yellow top so he stood out like a sore thumb is anyone's guess. That almost seems like a producer or someone trying to make their stamp on the game. I mean, had they offered the ability to select a colour palette, that would have been nice, but they didn't. They just changed the colour palette totally, which just seemed pointless. Again, you have other baffling changes like the hangar bay door. They added in a crack in the wall there. In the Japanese version it looks like something's blasted through, which is perhaps a hint to what's you've got stored for you in the head of the game, whereas in the Western version just have like a big open gate. Disco stage, just one example here. You'll notice they add in an additional enemy at the start. They also remove the table, which you see in that screenshot, and that table actually contains an apple to heal you up, so you then have to fight for much longer before you get a health pick. Of course, the first stage is quite well known, some of the changes, including the fact that they removed the mini-boss Ash, who was in the Japanese version. He was also a playable character, but yeah, he was taken out and replaced by Shiva, and the boss fight you fought him in was also removed. And finally, the last two pictures in the centre of the screen demo the odd name changes that went across the board. So the two girls in the Japanese version are known as Yasa and Onahaime, whereas for some reason they were just changed to Lisa and Mona in the Western version. I don't know why, because to me that's just busy work changing the names. But you will notice the health increase between Bare Knuckle 3 and Streets of Rage 3 on that boss, and bear in mind there's two of them, both with the same health, is massive. They have over double the health in Streets of Rage 3 at the same equivalent difficulty level. But that gives you an idea of what a grind it's turned into, as you basically the boss fight takes over twice as long in Streets of Rage 3, and that applies to almost every boss fight and some normal enemies throughout the entire game. So it really does increase the run time when playing the Streets of Rage 3. On the right, and this is actually one that I noticed myself, it isn't currently on the cutting room floor, is the cutscene changes between Bare Knuckle 3 and Streets of Rage 3. That screenshot's taken from the end of stage 1 just after you've beaten Shiva, where this appears, and interestingly you'll notice that the artwork in Streets of Rage 3 actually looks rather incomplete. So Skate's face doesn't look very good. It's been drawn much better in Bare Knuckle 3. The perspective on the way Blaze is looking is slightly incorrect. It doesn't match the other characters, and that's sorted out in Bare Knuckle 3. But the key clincher, and this is one of the reasons I think Bare Knuckle 3 is actually the later build, is the Streets of Rage version of Zan is actually based on what appears to be the earlier artwork of his sprite. So Zan's sprite, based on the cutting room floor and a few other websites, has stated that his sprite was clearly redrawn during production. Basically the artwork in Streets of Rage 3 of Zan at this point looks like it's based on the earlier sprite, whereas in Bare Knuckle it looks like it's based on the latest sprite, which would suggest that Streets of Rage 3 cutscene was actually done earlier. Plus it's meant to be at sunset and the yellow doesn't quite fit it, and the orange is much better suiting. So I think the Bare Knuckle 3 cut screens actually later. Incidentally, could explain why a lot of the story was missing, as perhaps some of the cutscenes weren't finished when they shipped Streets of Rage 3 to North America to begin printing of the cartridges. From my own personal experience, finalised cutscenes also tend to be one of the last things to actually go into the game as well. So just a bit more detail on some of the removed content. You had the mini-boss Ash, who was removed, and because he was removed from the game in the Western version, he was also a playable character. So not only did they remove him as a boss character, they also removed him as a playable character, as he was actually playable via a cheat code like Shiver. You also had the opening intro, which was totally missing from the Western version, which is a shame. You had Axel superbly punch the screen, and you also had the massive explosion in the opening intro that basically shows the city, because one of the big problems with Streets of Rage 3 is the plot is just butchered. The whole point of the story is Mr. X is taking revenge against the city, detonating bombs and replacing people with cyborgs as well. So you have a menacing hidden threat. And this is actually another thing that a lot of people miss about Streets of Rage 3 and Bare Knuckles 3, is a lot of people don't necessarily like the music that much. I actually think the soundtrack's very good, because the soundtrack is very much fitting with the story of the game, as it has all these mechanical sounds and like beeps and robotic noises, which perfectly fits the spirit of the game. You know, you have people being turned into robots. For example, you have the fake Axel, which is a cyborg. You have the cyborg Mr. X. You actually have Mr. X in a robot suit as well. There's quite a lot of robot enemies, and there's all the sort of mechanical threats. I mean, one of the enemies, his main enemies, is Dr. Zero's building robots, and that's all part of the plot. On top of the fact you have a menacing terror with the lingering bomb threat and everything. So there's actually quite a really nasty underlying concurrent, and that basically is beautifully portrayed in a lot of the music. It's not particularly pleasant to listen to, but it sums up the feel of the game. Very much like the soundtrack to the Joker in the film Batman: The Dark Knight. It's a rather unpleasant music and track to listen to, but it perfectly sums up the character of the Joker, and I think it suits the game, and in the case of the Batman: Dark Knight, it suits the film very well. But what neither of them are is easy listening. They are not soundtracks that you easily listen to, because they're quite hard hitting and match the ambience and environment that they're set in. So from the purpose of that way, they work really well. But if you want to have an easy listening track, then this is not the music score for you. Whereas in direct contrast, Streets of Rage 1 and 2 have very easy listening soundtracks, you know, with their 16-bit chiptune sounding. It's all very easy to listen to, really enjoyable. Doesn't necessarily suit the ambient dark streets of the world Streets of Rage is set in, but it's very easily listening to, and that's kind of my point. It doesn't necessarily suit the game that well, but it's fantastic to listen to. So I think the argument really is more about, do you want a soundtrack that's really great to listen to and doesn't necessarily suit the game, or do you want a soundtrack that suits the game but not that easy to listen to? Finally, I should also note that the game really does punish players if you don't have a 6-button controller. The reason being is the X button is assigned the special function, which allows you to pull off any of the star moves as and when you feel like it. Yes, the 3-level star move you can freely do on the very first stage if you have a 6-button controller, and you'll see me do it as Axel throughout this play move. I'll be using all the different star level moves. In fact, the star system largely becomes irrelevant when using a 6-button controller. And this is actually a feature I think a lot of people don't realise, not least because almost all the emulated collections don't document this either. In fact, you originally had a special sheet with all the moves included with the original Bare Knuckles 3 cartridge, and I've actually included all those moves in the right window of this picture. You can see there, that's all the commands to execute the special commands for all the various characters. But that's something that a lot of people I don't think realise to this day, that you can actually pull off all the special moves from the get-go if you have a 6-button controller. Because if you don't have a 6-button controller, the game literally does shaft you. So if you do plan on playing any version of the game, I highly recommend sourcing a 6-button controller before you even start. Right, that's enough from me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, skipped to the start of the playthrough as Axel. And if you enjoy this video once you've finished watching it, please do consider hitting that like button. And also please do, if you like our content, consider subscribing to the channel. If anyone's interested, I will consider doing a full, more in-depth comparison look at Streets of Rage 3 and Bare Knuckle 3 and all the various changes. There's actually a lot of removed content as well, which is very interesting. You could almost do a director's cut of the game with all the removed content added back in. Indeed, if anyone's interested, we could also do a video of the removed bike levels, which you can access via Game Genie cheat codes. They're not complete, but they're an interesting watch regardless. So suggestions in the comments if you want to see more. Let the Axel playthrough begin.